here a few minutes early just to get some of the stuff organized here. So we're not going to start here quite yet, but in a couple minutes here, about 5 minutes. So I just thought it'd be good just to get organized a little bit and see if this is coming up here. All right, just going to refresh this page. I just want to be able to get this and share it off. Where are we here? Hey, how's it going? Hey everyone. I'm trying to find my link here. See where the video, oh there we are, perfect. Sorry, I'm just on this other computer here, I'm just sharing this off to another page here. To my own timeline. There we go. All right. Well, I'll tell you, I had a lot of fun. Hey Keith, hey Diane. I had a lot of fun with this topic. Always actually have a lot of fun with these various topics. They're always very fascinating. Holy sweaty face, oh my God. They're always very fascinating, and it's really interesting because it's, there's so many conversations around these topics here. Sorry, I'm just changing my light in here so I don't, there, that's better. Yeah, there's so many, hey Keith, there's so much, so much information, more in the form of like advertisements and third-party representation, and when it comes to well, any topic, right? I mean, especially nutrition, because it's such a, of course, it's a billion-dollar, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So obviously, everyone's going to have their stake in how the conversation goes, and offering really sound advice. Offering things that really just make sense, and showing a body of evidence saying, look at my friend Sam, look at my friend Jill, look at what happened here, look what happened here. And excuse me, and honestly, if I took 500 diets and we'll call them weight loss diets in general, right? So 500 weight loss diets, and I ensured that, and one person per diet, right? So one person, each person followed the diet, and we set it up so that they could have their meals prepared for them, and they could eat consistently on this particular dietary plan for the course of, let's say, 2 weeks or even a month. And the meals are laid out for them, and they're consistent day in, day out. The likelihood is you'd see some form of adaptation, right? Because the body simply adapts, right, to whatever we do, whether it's a stupid thing, whether it's an intelligent thing, right, whether it's a middle-of-the-road half-assed thing, the body is simply going to follow your lead. And so it's, so the challenge is that when we get into these kind of conversations, there's two things that are happening. One, to the general person, to the general individual out there, they're going to be following something called the gas principle, right? And the gas principle doesn't mean being flagellant. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. The gas principle means general adaptation syndrome, right? So this really, it talks a lot about, of course, this is mainly designed, or the conversation was mainly around physiological adaptation to training effect. Hey Joe, hey Michelle, hey Pauline. The general adaptation syndrome really meant that, in general, the body is going to adapt to whatever consistent behavior that we submitted it to, right? So not eating breakfast over a period of time is an adaptation, right? So the body will adapt to not having breakfast. So and I know a lot of people, and over the years or a couple decades of training, I mean, so many people that, man, I haven't eaten breakfast, like, I don't know in how long, right? So you think when you remove that behavior, or you introduce a new behavior of not eating breakfast, the body will adapt to it, right? You get into the habit of not eating lunch, the body will adapt to that as well. It figures it out, right? Doesn't mean it's good for you, it just figures it out. So most of what we do, and most of what the general public does, I should say, and perhaps not a lot of you guys here that I've connected with, and you guys are educated in your own right. I have a lot of friends through various communities that are highly intelligent and very well read. But we're dealing with physiology, and of course we're dealing with biochemistry, the biochemistry of diet. It's just not that cut and dry, and there just simply is not enough research to prove within a shadow of a doubt that only one process is better than all the rest, right? So we have the general adaptation syndrome, right, which is just in general your body will adapt to to the general behavior that you go day to day, and that means you're not really thinking about it. You just got habituated into a certain pattern, and the body followed your lead. There's also something called the SAID principle, which is a specific adaptation to impose demand, which is very, very different than the GAS principle, which is the general adaptation syndrome. With me yet here? So specific adaptation to impose demand simply means that I'm going to put a specific set of behaviors or things in place. Dietary behavior, of course, we talk about diet here this evening. If I put a very specific set of dietary behavior in place, and then I'm specific to that behavior over time, I'm looking for an outcome, I know my body will adapt to that behavior over time. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be really great for me or it's going to tick all the boxes, but my body has to adapt to the behavior I'm pushing it through, right? Because at the end of the day, what is food other than chemistry? And when you consume food and it's chemistry, the body's going to read the chemistry coming in, and it's going to read it, and it's going to make a decision on what this chemistry means. Right? With me? So when we look at ketosis or the ketonic diets versus low carb, so of course the biggest distinction between low carb diets and ketonic diets is that a low carb diet generally, of course, follows the tune, of course, having low carbohydrate. Generally, more in reference to low starch. Right? So generally, we're talking about a low starch diet in general. But there's no real rules or even any research saying what low carb, there's a definitive term or a set point for what low carb really means. There really isn't anything out there. It's a hugely varying number and a varying concept. So low carb really isn't very definitive. And it varies from person to person. The low carb diet generally is very high in protein and generally more moderate in dietary fat. Now, when we look at ketonic diets, a ketonic diet is about 70 to 80% fat, and then you're looking at around 20 or 25%, anywhere from 20 to 25% protein, and only about 5% carbohydrates. So we're looking at maybe 30 grams of carbohydrates in the course of a day. So very minimal carbohydrate content, very, very low, but exceptionally high in fat. So it's a high fat, low to moderate protein, and very low, almost zero carbohydrate, really having only about 5% of the total calories coming from carbohydrate itself. So when I started kind of pouring through a lot of the research and looking at it, ketonic diets, of course, you're going to find a lot of favorable information based on people who are selling their concept of ketonic diets, right? So there's so much great information out there, and there's people with these beautiful bodies, and they're shredded, they look great, they have great hair. They speak about the benefits of going into ketosis, sticking with the ketonic diet, all the great benefits. But unfortunately, the only real research that's actually out there, and when we're talking about ketonic diets, is dealing with chronic obesity, right? Dealing with morbid obesity, and dealing with metabolic disorders, or dealing with disorders like epilepsy, and what else was it? Epilepsy, and there was a few other brain disorders that I came across. But the research wasn't really around what most of us wanted for. And what the general public wants ketonic diets for is for fat loss, right? We want to lose fat. So, and which that can certainly do, but one of the challenges, of course, with trying to utilize a ketonic diet, and we'll stick on this topic just for a little bit, and we'll go back to low carb in a second. The challenge of the ketonic diet, of course, is that because of the high fat content, there's an adaptation phase that people have to go through. Now that can last weeks and even months before you fully adapt to a generally high fat diet. Because remember, most of us were very carb adapted, right? So we've had carbohydrates since we're infants. We've had carbohydrates our whole lives. Even, of course, healthy or unhealthy, our body is well adapted to utilizing carbohydrates. So when we ingest carbohydrates and then convert to glucose, of course, we take the glucose into the cell and we burn off the glucose inside the cell, but outside this thing called the mitochondria. Okay, and this is an important distinction here. Mitochondria is where the body will transport fat, triglycerides, and burn that fat off for fuel, right? So when you're looking at carbohydrate versus fat, 1 gram of carbohydrate gives you 4 calories, 1 gram of fat gives you 9, right? So when you look at fat yields really such a much higher percentage of energy per gram. So it's almost like rocket fuel when you're dealing with carbohydrates like gasoline. But man, fat has so much energy in it. So if we could teach the body how to utilize it, that'd be awesome, you would think, for the most part. And it actually does work quite well. The challenge is, how many cells do we have in our body? Well, we've got about 10 billion cells entirely. And most of those cells, of course, if we've been glucose adapted for most of our life, so our body utilizes fat to some degree, but for the vast majority of us, we're very much glucose adapted. So for glucose adapted, of course, we have a higher percentage of capacity to utilize sugar as an energy source, secondarily fat, and then tertiary, then we look at maybe utilizing protein in points of when our body's in a very low, let's say a very low stage of energy. In order to convert the body from being glucose dependent to fat dependent, we actually have to do a couple things. One, we have to actually teach the mitochondria, right, to become more and more effective. And of course, mitochondria also has to proliferate, meaning that every cell in the body, if we deprive it predominantly of the glucose source, only 5 grams a day, which is really nothing, right? So there's almost no insulin response whatsoever. Not enough carbohydrate, not enough energy coming from the carbohydrate to even raise their insulin levels even minimally, then of course our body's going to have to find a way to utilize a different fuel source. But 10 billion cells, how long do you think that's going to take to encourage 10 billion cells to rewire their whole metabolic processes to go from what you've done for the last 35, 40 years into this whole new way of thinking, right? So it does take a while. So what ends up happening in the space between going from carbohydrate-based diet, and I'm not talking about a high carbohydrate, I mean, even having a 40% carbohydrate diet is still high enough to make you glucose dependent, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So when I cut my carbohydrates out and I'm down to 5% only of my entire dietary consumption, and I bring my fat content up about 80, to 80% fat for my total dietary intake, my body is going to be a little freaked out. It's saying, we don't have the mechanism currently to deal with this amount of fat. So you're going to go through a bit of disruptive bowel disorders. We'll just call it like diarrhea, liquid feces. You're going to go through brain meltdown, meaning that there's no energy in the body, right? The body doesn't have a fuel source. It doesn't have glucose. It was historically used to. So now it's actually trying to figure out what the hell to do with this fat. And as the fats keep showing up in the diet, it becomes a signal to the body to redesign its metabolic processes to become more adapted to utilizing fat as a fuel source. But that takes time. Now, if somebody is a type 1 diabetic or a type 2 diabetic or has issues with insulin, then it's not something you're going to want to jump into without medical supervision, right? So again, a lot of these articles and stuff you read, remember, reading on Google is not research. Just to let you know, very, very few people that read on Google are really getting the crux of the information. You're getting a sales pitch that's beautifully designed. As science, but it's not that cut and dry, because real scientists always say, well, it depends. They never give you an absolute, because there's no such thing. How long is the adaptation process on average? There is no average, right? Because everybody's so unique, right? So you may go through a period of 4 or 5 days where what they call the ketone flu, where of course your blood sugar level is so low you can barely think, and you're walking the furniture, and basically you're just a really really miserable SOB to be around, because your blood sugar levels are low. And anybody that's had low blood sugar and tends to be like cranky, I think we call it hangry. Well, you may be hangry for a couple of days, and you just might want to move out of your house and leave your family safe and sound until you adapt, right? If you choose to go that way. But not everybody deals with, of course, the adaptation process the same way. And why? Because we're all metabolically different, right? So my diet again is Hey Jim, no whiskey for the hamstring thing, Jim. So my diet is very low carbohydrate, but what it simply means is very low starch, right? So I really minimize the starch I have in my diet. It's a little bit higher in fat, a little bit higher in protein, right? So my diet. Now one of the things that the mistake I made for quite a few years actually, and I realized that this was something that was really throwing me off, is that when you look at what a lot of people consider a ketogenic diet, it's actually a very high protein diet. And the problem when your protein levels are too high, and let's say on a ratio, your diet was 40% protein, right? And it was 40% fat and then only 20% carbohydrate. You know, it seems like a nominal mix. The problem is protein can be broken down and converted into glucose, which can raise your insulin levels, right? So one of the things that one of the errors that I made over the years, and something I'm actually trying to re-regulate as I understand more and as I try to figure my body out as I continue to grow through this process, is that I had to start bringing my protein levels down and actually drive my fat levels up, because I kept finding my blood sugar level kept dropping. And part of it can be stress related, because high levels of stress, of course, drives your cortisol levels. High levels of cortisol, of course, will drop your blood sugar levels very rapidly. So nevertheless, again, we're dealing with this whole process of playing around, trying to get the body regulate if we choose to go through this ketonic process. So let's say it may take you the course of a week to really get your body to start to adapt to it. Now it's not a full. Now you probably won't be fully ketonic or fully adapted within a week. But most of the symptoms of actually that transition phase between glucose dependent to becoming more fat adapted may only take a week. But again, 10 billion cells. Honestly, it's going to take a while. What you'll probably find is the better solution, if you choose to go that way, is look at what actually Dr. Tudor Bompa, he's a researcher. He was a professor at Guelph University back east, and I've been following this guy for a long time. Brilliant researcher, and he's actually a researcher, not some guy trying to sell something on the internet. And he looked at this whole metabolic process. He was a huge fan of bodybuilders. He liked bodybuilders for some reason. And he looked at something called a metabolic diet. And the metabolic diet was actually really trying to put the body in that low carbohydrate levels. But he realized that in order to build muscle, though, in order to build muscle, we need some insulin levels to be pushed up at some point in time in our body. So he ran a 5-day low carbohydrate, high fat, moderate protein diet, so Monday to Friday, and then there was a 2-day, like Saturday, Sunday, a 2-day of a carb load or carb upregulation. And what he found was that in order to increase muscle tissue, in order to really build muscle tissue and to actually support high levels of athletics, let's say for example, people doing high intensity interval training, people doing Olympic weightlifting, the factor 3 type training that we do, these microcircuits where it's really a lot of push, and it's all we call anaerobic threshold. We can't utilize fat fast enough to support that level of activity. Who does really well, and the athletes that have actually really turned to ketonic diets for their activities are more endurance-based athletes, because they found once they actually taught the body over time to adapt to the high levels of fat in the diet. Of course, at high levels of fat, increase the number of mitochondria, the fat-burning cells inside each of our cells. So little fat-burning plants. So the fat adaptation actually meant the proliferation of the mitochondria, and all of a sudden, let's say at the beginning of the diet they had 1 million mitochondria, and then 4 months later they had 7 million. Well, the ability, you have 6 million more mitochondria, which means you have all these extra places to utilize fat as a fuel, so your body's pumping in all this energy. So they found their endurance levels were not quite high. And that was actually really great for endurance athletes. Some MMA fighters actually started utilizing ketonic type diets because of the power endurance required in MMA fighting. But at the end of the day, the challenge you'll find, of course, it just won't be for everybody. Not everybody can tolerate the ketonic flu, which is, of course, that phase of not having any carbohydrate at all, and that 3 to 1 week phase where a lot of people struggle through it. We know that most people they don't want to struggle, right? Most people aren't unfortunately, most of us are not up to the task. And when you look at this day and age, how often would you have a glass of wine? How often do you want a bottle of beer? Do you ever go out for dinner? Do you ever have birthday cake, right? Do you ever have a chip or two, right? So the whole idea of being in a ketonic state is something that you really have to consider, and does it fit well with your lifestyle? One thing I would challenge most of you in the very beginning is that look at what you're currently doing. If what you're currently doing, you're doing it well because one, you're knowledgeable, two, it's intentional. You actually thought about what you're doing as your current dietary behavior. You actually gave it some, you gave it some thought, right? It was an intentional process. You actually looked at trying to really, you've monitored what you're doing, right? So you had a certain level of protein you wanted in your diet, you had a certain level of carbohydrate, certain level of fat. You really gave it some thought, you implemented it, and this is what's happening, and it's not working. Then I would suggest go and try something else. However, if you are one of the many normal people who walk into a diet without really understanding it, don't take the effort to try to understand it, and then put your hand, wave the white flag saying, this no longer works for me, then, you know, I would suggest go back to what you're doing and see what you're doing first. Do that before you go off into a ketonic diet and start slamming down sausages and bacon for breakfast every morning. Right? Jessica, actually, I'm not really sure about that. I think, again, because of the high levels of fat, it'd be something interesting to look at. When, Jessica, for questions like that, I would go to the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and actually look into the research article and plug that in. And you may find there'd be some information around that. What they would probably recommend, of course, is usually using, if somebody was to, if they found it necessary to put somebody in a ketonic diet without a gallbladder, they would probably recommend the ingestion of a fat digesting enzyme called lipase, right, to actually support the digestive process of fat. So it'd be something interesting, but off the cuff, I don't know the answer to that. So again, the long and short of it now, we have, of course, oral sources of ketone esters now that are being produced. Of course, we just got, over the last couple of months, I just got hammered with all these questions and all these people saying, hey, do you want to try this? Do you want to try this? Well, honestly, you know, my diet, again, is, you know, is probably moderately ketonic for the most part. I'm bringing my protein levels down. I'm really driving my fat levels up. I personally use MCT oil, so from Bulletproof Coffee. They produce Bulletproof MCT oil, which is basically a fractionated coconut oil. And I put that in my meal replacements to really drive the fat content up. And what I found is that when I use MCT oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride, and the medium chain triglyceride, actually the body can break it down and utilize it very rapidly, almost like sugar. So again, it feels really good in my brain, right? Because again, my sugar levels are too high. I find my blood sugar level drops very rapidly because I'm a little bit of a busy guy, busy in my head. So you know, my cortisol levels are always an issue. So I really had to utilize a lot of fat in my diet to really slow that process down. So MCT oil actually went up. MCT oil, I started adding to all my shakes, so I wanted to change around the ratio. So I use a shake called Isolene Pro, which has a very low sugar content to it anyhow, very, very low glycemic, which simply means it has a very limited effect on the insulin levels in the body, which is perfect. So, but again, the protein content was about 36 grams. So I actually put 2 tablespoons of MCT oil to really bring up I brought up the caloric content of the meal replacement that I was using. But I wanted to bring up the fat content because it slowed down the absorption, which left me satiated for much longer, right? We can be fuller longer. The problem with most meal replacements that I've used over the years is that they leave my stomach in about 15 seconds. I'm starving about 10 minutes later. So adding fat to my meal replacement. Now some people are fine, but for just myself personally, I find I need to add the extra fat to make it last longer. So again, I think we need to explore why we want to utilize a ketonic diet. And again, if what you're currently doing you don't understand, if what you're currently doing you hadn't followed through, then the likelihood is you're not going to do well on the ketonic diet, because it does require that process of suffering through. For most of us will suffer through that low blood sugar, head fog, just really not feeling very good, aches and pains for a couple days, or even the course of a week before our body starts to adapt, to acclimate to the high levels of fat. Now the other thing, of course, we're looking at I mentioned that for people that do a lot of high-level, high-intensity training, ketonic diets may not be the best thing overall. And again, because of the rapid demands of energy the body requires for doing high-intensity type training, fat just does not break down as fast, right? So again, ketonic diets are really, really great for people that are more endurance-based. Now, if you are looking at you want to build muscle tissue, well, building lean muscle. Again, one of the challenges we have is, and suggested challenge, again, there's not a lot of research out here yet, right? A lot of opinions, but not a lot of research that's really going to point to this. Because most of the research in ketonic diets has a lot to do with epilepsy, depression, things of that nature, not really about, those of us just wanting to lose a bit of body fat, to look a little bit better, right? So, I'm sure the research is forthcoming at some point in time, but at this stage, this isn't enough to give you an absolute. But but when you're looking at, when trying to build lean muscle tissue, of course, when you're training at anaerobic threshold levels, we know that insulin is actually a powerful anabolic hormone. Now, bodybuilders and athletes who test the waters of playing around with pharmaceuticals and drugs, insulin is something that a lot of not natural competitive bodybuilders will inject into the body because it drives insulin growth hormone, which is an anabolic hormone. So insulin is actually an anabolic hormone because it actually drives these other hormones into action. So I'm a bodybuilder and I want to build, let's say you're an individual who wants to put on some lean muscle tissue. A ketonic diet, maybe you may find it very challenging to actually put on the lean muscle because the anabolic drivers that we would get from insulin, from controlled levels of insulin, from a healthy diet, just wouldn't be there. And there's also inherently the risk, and again, it's all hyperbole, right? It's all just, we're all guessing at this right now, but there's also a risk of actually losing a little bit of muscle when you go on to the ketonic diet. You may feel a bit deflated, of course, because when I remove the glucose out of my system, well, the body, it takes almost 3 to 4 grams of water to store 1 gram of sugar inside my muscle. So when I drop all the sugar out of my body, guess what the first amount of weight I'm going to lose? Well, it's water. So my water table is going to drop about 7 pounds. And if you're a physique athlete, or if you train for a while in the gym and you like how your muscles feel nice and hard, well, why do they feel nice and hard? Well, partially because there's a really good degree of tone inside the muscle, but the other part because they're full of water, because we had a massive uptake and the body's drawing glucose into the muscle, right, to support the activity, and of course glucose is driven by water. Water carries it in, so when you drop your water, of course, you're going to feel a bit deflated, a bit flat, and of course your overall strength levels may go down. So lots of things to consider, right, when you're coming into it. Again, when you're going back to low carb diets, of course, low carb diets, there's no real definition and there's no real conversation around really what does that mean. For everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. For myself, what I really try to do, of course, and I'm a fan of Dr. Tudor Bompa. I like his process of actually giving myself an opportunity to play around with my diet a little bit, and because again, we live in a world that's relatively social, and if you have a social life and you want to hang out with your friends, and you want a glass of wine, and you want to have a beer, and you want, of course, over the summer I probably drink more wine over the summer than I have in a long period of time. But because I control my overall carbohydrate intake, and again, very low starch, lots of fiber in my crunchy leafy vegetables, right? Lots of those. Love big salads, love zucchini and peppers and organic greens. I could eat them. I could just eat buckets of them, and of course I love my protein. Love avocados. I love my cheese. Right, so all these things actually work really well, and again, I get to actually have a diet that has a lot of flavor to it. But I'm really quite consistent over time, and when I sit down and eat something, I'm very intentional. So 80% of what I do is kind of spot on. So when I have for breakfast, I'm really conscious about how much fat in my diet, and again, my diet probably sits at about 50% fat most of the time. And I'm guessing here, but generally about 50% of my diet comes from dietary fat. And there's lots of little tricks you can play around with as well. So for example, if you're sitting down at a meal and you find that, of course, your body's very sensitive to sugars, of course, that may have something to do with your level of stress. If you're currently under a high level of stress and your cortisol levels are to the ceiling, everybody put your hand up if you have no stress. No hands went up. Okay, just as I thought, right? So we've been so stressed out for so long, we think it's normal. which is why a lot of the times that we struggle with blood sugar levels, we struggle with this whole process of managing our blood sugar, and of course we think our body fat comes from just eating carbohydrates. Well, there's probably only 752,000 reasons why you carry body fat, right? And not being on the ketogenic diet probably wasn't the key factor, because there's a lot of people out there, when you look at vegetarians, right? I see vegetarians who have beautiful bodies, right? I see people on the ketogenic diet who have beautiful bodies. I see people that eat the way I do and have a great physique. So who's right? Well, we really don't know. We have to look at a diet that's actually going to match your lifestyle. And if you're not willing to do it forever, don't even bother starting, which is always my suggestion to everyone. If it's not going to be a lifestyle, then don't even start, right? It's a complete waste of time. It's a knee-jerk reaction. You're going to spend a bunch of money that's never really going to work, and it'd be one more thing that you fail at, and you're not going to be very happy with yourself. So if you roll all the way back to the beginning and ask yourself, what is it you're looking for in a dietary behavior? What are you currently doing? And with what you're currently doing, do you really understand what you are doing? Do you actually have a definitive plan for your dietary lifestyle? Or are you just knee-jerking your way from an abstract bit of dietary tips and tricks that you learned over time, stuff you took from your childhood, some maybe took from your culture, something you read in Muscle and Fitness, something you saw from your beautiful friend with a nice ass and a six-pack, and you abstract all these pieces together? Or do you really know what you're doing at all? I'm not suggesting you need a background in biochemistry to figure it out, but if you're really struggling and you really want that next piece, you're going to have to use some intelligence, and you're going to have to take the time to figure it out. Right? But again, the caveat is, if you're not willing to do it forever, don't bother starting, because again, it's just that's the part that people really get frustrated with. I know a lot of people here that are listening right now, they have a lifestyle. Okay, I've started this lifestyle about 23 years ago. I mean, when I was 28 years old, I decided I was going to give this a whirl, and I spent the last 2 decades plus trying to figure it out. I went vegan, and I tried vegan for about 6 months. My masseter muscles grew 3 times the normal size. I looked like freaking Arnold Schwarzenegger. I couldn't chew that much food. It was just impossible. The vegetarian diet did not work for me. I need fat. I need lots of fat. I need protein. I love vegetables. Good for my guts. Good for lots of things in my body. But I just couldn't eat that much vegetation. So my masseter muscles were sore from chewing that much roughage. So some people, will do very well on a diet that's more vegan based. Some people will do amazingly well on the Mediterranean diet. In fact, there was some real research, that actually looked at dealing with clients that were dealing with obesity, and they used the ketogenic diet to get them going, to actually start pulling some of the weight off rapidly. And then in between, they used the Mediterranean diet to actually sustain them, and it actually worked out really quite well. So a combination of cycling your diet, so cycling the ketogenic diet. And also there's records of athletes who will also use a ketogenic diet, and they'll cycle it within their training throughout the year. But high levels of training during the stages of high intensity training, most athletes cannot go on a ketogenic diet because of the rapid demands of energy that, of course, fat by itself cannot produce quick enough. So I'm not sure that answers any questions, or actually makes or offers you more questions. But at the end of the day, it really depends. It really depends what you're after. For myself personally, because of the way I train, so I'm a bodybuilder, but I also do a lot of high intensity interval training, right? So a lot of the training that I do is a lot of push to it. So I use a massive amount of that energy, a huge demand for energy while I'm training. If I was totally ketogenic, that just wouldn't work for me. I would suffer. Trying to put on lean muscle tissue, and again, the research, as far as they know, right, it's not an absolute, but what their consideration is that if you want to put on any significant amount of muscle mass, then a ketogenic diet would not be the thing for you, because the levels of insulin are almost non-existent, and insulin's an anabolic driver, which actually drives the production of insulin growth-like hormone, IGF-1, and of course that's a big hormonal driver for development of muscle tissue and the promotion of protein synthesis. So, insulin's not a bad thing, right? So again, lots of things to consider. It's kind of challenging, isn't it? So, but again, like I said, and I'll end this very simply by going back and saying, with what you're currently doing, do you even understand what you're doing? Right? Are you consistent with your current behavior? Do you know how much protein you eat during the day? Do you know Do you know what? Do you know how much dietary fat do you get during the day? If you don't know these things, then don't go on to the ketogenic diet and start hammering things down your neck if you don't have the answer. And I know it's challenging in this day and age with so much information, and we're really being yarded around. But at the end of the day, you got 10 billion cells that really are looking to you for advice. They're looking to you and looking to your daily behaviors to see if you're going to do something sensible that not only will actually help you maintain enough lean body mass, but actually support your brain health, right? Your cellular health over time. So somewhere down the road, when having a nice ass and a six pack isn't the biggest of your concern, it's whether your brain function, whether you're having cognitive decline or not, right? Whether you're still able to be physically independent as you age. And I know so many of us living in at this point in time in our life, we feel we're kind of cocky. I'm young, I'm strong, right? I feel pretty good. Well, we're already that way for a short period of time. And so you really want to think, yes, there's things I want now, but there's also things I'm looking at in the future. And that's where my mind always goes. Yes, I love what I'm doing now. I love training. You know, I love what training does for me. But my real key concern is, how am I going to be 20 years from now? Because whatever I do now is actually setting the stage for that. So I'm always one eye on what's happening now, one eye on what may happen in the future. So all my daily behaviors are really kind of pushing to that end, making sure when I'm 70 and 80 years old, I'm not going to become dependent on my kids and on society. So I'm not sure that answered any questions for you, but one last little thing. Again, there's not a friend of mine, but a lady I've talked to, and I follow her. Her name is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. So she has this website called followmyfitness.com, and she has, of course, she's a PhD researcher. She's young, she's hip, she's brilliant. Absolutely love this woman, love listening to her. Because, again, real researchers say, we don't know. It depends. As far as we know, what we think is happening, that's what a scientist will say, right? What a marketer will say is, you know, this is the only thing that works. This is the best thing since sliced bread. You got to try this. Look at all these great examples of all these things that happen. You know, I can take 10 different diets and again assign it to 10 different people. And if I had absolute adherence, I'm going to get 10 people who are going to get good results. You know, so again, the body will, you know, consistency in any behavior is going to net an end result. Again, my closing comment goes back to what I said before. Know what you're doing now before you decide to jump the fence into something else. Know what you're doing right now. Know what your ratios are. And somebody had asked, I think it was Jessica asked, what is the absolute ratio? Well, years ago, of course, the baseline ratio that I used was based on the research by Dr. Barry Sears, and it was a book called The Zone. And I think this is in the late 80s and the 90s when The Zone came out. And again, it gained a lot of popularity, lots of science, right? Lots of research behind it. And there's lots of, you can actually prove anything, right? Which proves nothing. At the end of the day, we got to find out what works for us. But the Zone diet was 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 30% protein. And it was a really good baseline diet. And he had all this research that said, of course, this was the absolute ratio that worked for everybody. The problem is there's a few billion people on the planet, and we're not all designed that way, right? If I try the Zone diet on somebody in Nunavut or Tuktoyaktuk, it may not work so well for the person who eats blubber and the high fish as a really big part of the diet. If I took the 40-30-30 diet down in South America, and perhaps there's somebody who is more of a vegetarian, the diet wouldn't work for them as well. So we have a genetic, cultural component to who we are. We have a whole history of things that we've lived through, our current level of stress, our genetic behavior, illnesses we may have had, how we train. Like, it's just, there's so many variables that we just don't have a concrete, this is the answer. All I know for sure, for me, and again, this is from my own experience, the things I'm looking for is that, one, I want a clear head throughout the day, so I want my brain to function, I want to be able to think clearly, I want my blood sugar levels to be stable, I want my energy levels to be high, I want to continue to support lean muscle growth and build more lean muscle tissue even as a 52-year-old athlete. I'm still looking to slowly put on muscle each year. So I'm going to support those processes. And of course, I want great metabolic health. So every year I go through and I get extensive blood work done through an integrated physician. Your GP generally won't do it, but an integrated physician, I'll get a ton of blood work done just to see where I'm at. I check it every year to make sure what I'm doing is actually moving in the right direction. But there's lots of things that will actually point to you and tell you either what you're doing is right, what you're doing is wrong. Again, energy levels, cognition, right? So your moods, right? Your overall emotional state can be a lot of it can be controlled by your diet, and your overall physiology, your degree of leanness. You know, there's a whole bunch of things why that's the way it is, right? So high levels of stress, low activity, low protein, high carbohydrates. There's probably 100 things or 150 things that are responsible for perhaps the place where you may find yourself in. So basically, create your foundation, know where you're at, know what you're doing right now before you jump off onto the ketonic bandwagon. And yeah, I mean, you know, it may work just fine, and you know, I'm not saying you can't, but if you don't know what you're doing now, and you're not willing to put the time and effort to figure it out, the jump into the ketonic diet is not going to give you what you want. You'll be sadly disappointed with a bunch of money invested into a bunch of ketone esters thrown down your neck, and without really understanding the process. And I'm a firm believer that if you want health, you're going to freaking earn it, right? You're going to earn it by actually working for it and by taking the time to understand it. If you're not willing to do that, you're never going to have it. You're never going to be satisfied. You'll always be disappointed, and then you'll have to make up a story why it never worked. Right? You with me? Right? So it's called personal accountability. Figure it out. Become educated. Right? Otherwise, everything that comes down the pike, everything you see on Facebook, every time a friend says, "Hey, gotta try this thing. This is freaking amazing," right? Your heart's gonna pound, your adrenal's gonna pump, you're gonna leap at it, and then you're not gonna stick with it. Why? Because we just don't stick with anything, right? So, and again, it's not meant to be insulting. It's just the reality of it. You know, there's a reason why some people make great wealth. That do very well in business. It's not because they have there's something special about them. It's just they stuck with something, they learned the skills, they took the time, they figured it out. There's a reason why people have physiques a certain way, right? They took the time, they learned the skill, they figured it out, invested the time. And the same thing goes with this part here. The dietary part, you get 10 billion cells. They're made up of out of what? What you shove down your face every single day. It's worth the time to figure it out. I'm just saying. All right, well, listen. I'm going to stop babbling here. I'm on a rant, I can tell, so I'll leave it here. Not trying to be insulting, not trying to be patronizing, and really trying to be a little bit informative, but being the devil's advocate a little bit, by saying we just don't know, right? So again, if you want to try it, by all means, try it and test it out. But I would actually look at more at the ketonic diet itself and learning how to manage the foods rather than using the ketone esters, which is throwing down ketone esters down your neck. And yes, they can work. However, I'm a big fan of actually people just digging in, rolling up the sleeves, and just figuring this stuff out and see if it works for you. And if it does, let me know. Right? It's just again, but with Dr. Tudor Bompa, this is one of my great books, Serious Strength Training. Big old mean guy in the front. So in here he actually has an outline of a metabolic diet for athletes, mainly for bodybuilders, about how you drive up blood sugar levels, how you actually re-energize the body by doing a big carb load over a 2-day period. So he's got some great information in there if you guys want to look at it. But I'm checking out. I have a phone call I got to get on, and have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and I appreciate your attention. Let me know what you do with them. I'll be kind of curious to see what your results are going to be like. All right, bye.